So now we're going to talk about chapter 6, The Bones Within Us, which starts on page 127. Osteology is the study of bones. Osteo means bone, ology means study. We have 206 bones in the adult human body. They are a living tissue. Bones grow, they change from different pressures, such as environmental pressures, the amount of exercise you do, activities such that cause them to break, diseases that can affect them, and individual variation can affect bones, such as your age, your gender, your geographic origin, the amount of activity you have during your life, any diseases that can affect bones, and any injuries. Bones serve several different functions within the body. One is just general support for soft tissue attachment. It's what allows us to be upright and move the way we do. Otherwise, we'd be more like a slug or an octopus or something like that with no bones. They also serve as protection for soft tissues and organs. So your skull protects your brain, your rib cage protects your heart and your lungs. They work toward your movement. So we move differently than a slug or an octopus because we have a lever and pulley system between the bones and our muscles pulling on the bones. And they act as mineral and lipid storage. Lipid is another word for fat. So bones store calcium and phosphate, and they also store lipids in the form of marrow within the long bones. Information that we can learn from bones includes, again, we can get some idea of the age of the individual, their ancestry, sometimes their gender, what their gender at birth, whether they were physically active or not, and diseases, and whether they broke any bones. So when we look at the skeleton is divided into two major basic sections: the axial skeleton, which is the center line skeleton, and the appendicular skeleton. So today we're going to talk about the axial skeleton, which is the skeleton part of your skeleton that develops first during fetal development. During fetal development, when a fetus first starts developing, they don't have bones. What appears to be bones on X-ray or ultrasound is actually made out of cartilage that forms the shape of the bones. And then starting at about 3 months of into fetal development, the cells of the cartilage begin to be changed into bone cells. And that's called ossification, to be turned into bone. So the axial skeleton, which is the skull and the vertebrae and the ribs and the sternum, that all develops before the appendicular skeleton, the pectoral girdle, the pelvic girdle, the arms, and the legs. On page 129 of your book, there is an illustration of a long bone, because mostly we're going to talk about bones. We're going to talk about the shape of the long bones. And so it shows the different parts of a long bone. So if we pretend that my fist is the end of the long bone and that my forearm is the bone itself, so there would be the shaft of the long bone, and the end is called the epiphysis. So the shaft is called the diaphysis, the end is called the epiphysis, and where they meet is called the epiphyseal plate. So this part at birth is bone, and this part is bone, and this right here is going to be cartilage, because this is where you're going to grow from. Because when you're a baby, your bones are all growing, and it grows and the epiphyseal, you have an epiphyseal plate at either end of your long bone, and that cartilage is where the bone grows. So it will expand outward in both directions, here and at the other end, so that your bone will grow until you hit a certain age. And we'll talk about this later in the semester, but each bone in your body, the epiphyseal plates tend to close on a regular basis. They tend to, because by full adulthood, all your epiphyseal plates will have ossified and fused. and because your bones aren't going to grow anymore. And that happens in a pretty predictable order for humans. So it's one way that we can help age a skeleton is by which epiphyseal plates are open or closed. Then at the ends of the bone where they articulate or touch another bone, so like our elbow, that's a point of articulation between bones, are covered with cartilage. So the ends of the epiphyseum have cartilage on them. The rest of your bone, where there's not cartilage, is covered by the periosteum, which is a connective tissue that does several different things. It protects the outside of the bone. It provides attachment for ligaments and tendons, and it helps support blood vessels and nerves running in and out of that bone. Then, if you look at the picture, it shows a cutaway because even though our bones are not hollow like a bird's bones, we still have a cavity in the long bones, and that's called the medullary cavity. And that is where you have marrow. And in the diaphysis and the shaft of your bone, that medullary cavity contains yellow marrow, which is where fat cells, lipid, is produced and stored. And that's, like an energy reserve for your body. Then at the ends of your long bones is the spongy bone where red marrow is formed. And red marrow is where your blood cells form. And that the blood cells are produced there and stored there until they're needed to circulate in your body. So you have two types of bone tissue. You have compact or dense bone tissue, and that's what you see in the illustration. Around the outside of that shaft is compact, dense bone. And then within the epiphyseal ends, at the ends of the bone, is spongy bone, where it's got a whole bunch of different cells and openings, like little cavities. And that's where the red marrow is, where the blood cells are being formed. So two different types of bone tissue. So next thing we're going to talk about is anatomical terminology, because we need to develop the vocabulary to talk about what we're looking at as we move through the semester. So if you look in your book, there is a picture on page 128 of a person standing up. And this is called anatomical position. So it's because we're bipedal, we walk on two legs, it's shown on standing up on two legs. Your feet are facing forward and your arms are to the sides with your palms facing forwards and your thumbs facing to the outside. That's anatomical position. So when we talk about things, it's in relation to picturing somebody standing in that position. Then we have split the body into different planes to talk about where things are in relation to each other when you're in anatomical position. So the first thing you have is the mid-sagittal or median plane. So that comes along the center of my head here. And it's like if you took a piece of glass and ran it right through my body to make a left and a right side. This not only splits the body into left and right, but allows you to talk about things being closer to the median or farther away from the median. So medial, lateral. So as it gets closer to the midline, it's medial, and if it's farther away, it's lateral. So like my ear is lateral to my nose. My eye is medial to my ear. So you can talk about where things are in relation to each other. The next plane is the coronal plane. Coronal means crown, so it goes like you're wearing a crown this way. Again, like you've taken a sheet of glass and run it through the middle of my body. I have the front of my body and the back of my body, which is going to be anterior and posterior. So my nose is anterior to the back of my head. My ear is posterior to my chin. So, front and back. Then the last one is the transverse plane, and that's as like, saw a woman in half. It's like somebody took something right horizontally right through the middle of your body. And you have the superior and inferior. So if it's closer to your head, it's superior. And if it's closer to your feet, it's inferior. So your head is superior to your shoulders. Your knees are inferior to your shoulders. So that's, you have that up and down way of talking about things. And then we have terminology that's specific to the limb, because you can't really talk about medial and lateral about your elbow, because your elbow can go all over the place. And anatomically, it's it moves around too much. So on the limbs, we talk about proximal and distal. So the closer to the midline, if you picture your arm in, it's down in the anatomical position, the closer to the midline something on your limb is, the more proximal it is. The farther away, the more distal it is. So my fingers are distal to my elbow. My elbow is proximal to my wrist. My elbow is closer to the midline than my wrist, but my fingers are farther away than my elbow. So it gives you a way of talking about, where things are in comparison to other parts of the body. Because we are doing anthropology and we're going to be talking about non-human primates, we also need to talk about quadrupeds, animals that walk on four legs. And some terms we cannot use. We can't use superior, inferior, because they're not upright. Okay. And we can't use anterior, posterior, again, because they're not in this upright position. They're going to be, this is going to be their back, and their legs are going to be down here. We have to talk about different terms. So if we picture this is their head and this is their tail, then this is the top, their back, where their spine is, and this is going to be their belly. So where the belly is ventral, the back is dorsal. Think about like dorsal, like a dorsal fin on a dolphin or a whale or a shark. Dorsal fin on the back, and then this is their ventral. And then the head is cranial and the tail is caudal. So if it's something that's closer to the head, it's more cranial. If it's closer to the tail, it's going to be more caudal. Okay.